Oil paints that could kill. Did Albrecht and Margaret Durer poison their customers with their paintings? This publication has a copyright of January 2014. Written by Dr. Elizabeth Garner and Joe Kiernan. How oil paints and oil pigments were manufactured in Renaissance times. Oil painting was an extremely dangerous occupation. All pigments were handmade using various extremely toxic materials that, if not handled with extreme caution and correctly, could kill. The process to develop the medium was usually made from a linseed oil base and or a variety of other similar oils as an additive. Olive oil was a popular oil-based mixture of the time until it was discovered olive oil works its way through the paint and ends up dripping out. This happens because the olive oil virtually never dried fully, and in time, with the added help of moisture in the patron's home or church, it comes to the surface. It is known Leonardo da Vinci was adding wax to his paints to thicken them for better working because of this problem with olive oil. Another trick Renaissance painters discovered was adding 5 to 10% honey to the mixture to preserve discoloration, especially in darker colors. When producing pigments for a color's chemical changing process, known back then as alchemy, was needed in order to attain the copper sulfate necessary. The more arsenious oxide used to do this, the deadlier the fumes produced and the more concentrated was the toxicity of the pigment powders. Apprentices were the ones usually assigned to the mixing tasks. The masters knew this and had to teach them to be very, very careful. The colors of green, yellow, red, and blue as being toxic in preparation and application, and without a sealing coat to lock in the fumes, these would all continue to release poisonous fumes for its lifetime. Even with a clear coat, and as it cracks and chips, it releases toxic fumes again. It's really good that all of Durer's paintings are in museums now, where only the staff could be getting poisoned. How much green? Green kills. Green pigments used in the Renaissance included verdigreen, malachite, emerald green, and Paris green. If green pigments are not sealed by a clear binding coat, this pigment will deliver a slow dose of concentrated arsenic gases. The greens produced this way today are just as deadly. Mercury is a byproduct of creating green pigments. Green was deadly. The greener the color, the deadlier it was. How white is white? Lighter colors used in the whites and soft yellows were created using white lead. White lead was a favorite choice of many for its consistency and pliability to create an image over a few days. It was highly toxic during production and application. We must also know that all of these paintings, including whites or flesh tones, have had white lead added to the mixtures, palette, or surface of these works. If not sealed by a protective sealing top coat when applied, it will release poisonous lead gases throughout its lifetime. How blue can you get? For the pigments of blue, it was known that lapis lazuli was the prime choice, as was aquamarine. These two pigments were very expensive and usually only ended up on the dress of royalty until the end of the 15th century. Azurite was another excellent option for making a strong blue pigment in the 14th to 16th centuries. It was acquired in deposits in silver veins and also through copper ore. The mines that produced these minerals during the Renaissance time were in Central Europe, mostly owned by the Nuremberg patricians, and in France. Azurite, on many paintings of the day, was often mislabeled as lapis lazuli to cheat customers. No matter how one worked with this product, the production and application of this color created many noxious fumes from arsenic sulfate. Another manufacturing process produced a highly toxic gas known as mercury cyanide. Both products were deadly. Red equaled death, red equaled yellow death. Making red paint was a hugely sought-out color by customers in their paintings during this time. Realgar is the most likely choice of pigments in Germany. This mineral was produced in Hungary, Bohemia, and Saxony, from the mines once again owned by the Nuremberg patrician corporations and syndicates. It can be found in the mines along veins of lead, silver, and gold. Realgar was known at the time as ruby of arsenic or ruby of sulfur. It has wonderful qualities and is brilliant red after a mining brutal production which spewed arsenic gases into the air. Mining was very dangerous. The powder was then collected and ground into the pigment powder. If this powder were left in the sunlight, it would turn a shade of yellow. This yellow was known as orpiment, another highly valued color in paintings. Mercury was a strong byproduct of producing the reds, especially realgar and vermilion when making copper sulfate. The mercury is what was used to make the copper sulfates. Using mercury to speed up the chemical production for the metal engraving plates would be used. The chemicals were always on hand. This mercury is a byproduct of producing the powder for the reds and the greens. In the 15th and 16th centuries, Spain was using realgar to kill rats. Some nations still use it for the same purpose today. Even today, realgar and orpiment are two of the three top elements used in the production of arsenic. Deadly stuff. Black Death. Black at the time was made using the same toxic mediums. However, the pigment itself was acquired mostly by scraping the soot from lamps and or grinding up burnt bones and horns. The process wasn't toxic. It was the oil base it was added to that was fatal. It was to this mixture that Renaissance artists perfected the 5 to 10% honey addition to avoid color fading to a gray. Arsenic is colorless and odorless. Arsenic poisoning was the choice of poisons of the period a la bourgeois. Symptoms of arsenic poisoning begin with headaches, confusion, severe diarrhea, and drowsiness. As the poison develops, convulsions and changes in fingernail pigmentation occur. When the poisoning became acute, symptoms included diarrhea, vomiting, blood in the urine, cramping muscles, hair loss, stomach pain, and more convulsions. The organs of the body that are usually affected by arsenic poisoning are the lungs, skin, kidneys, and liver. The final result of arsenic poisoning is coma and death. Arsenic is related to heart disease, hypertension-related cardiovascular, cancer, stroke, chronic lower respiratory diseases, and diabetes. Mercury poisoning. Let's also remember that in the Renaissance, people with depression and syphilis were being treated with mercury. It was commonly available. They were all adding mercury to wine, and it was known but not controlled that mercury made the taste of wine a bit sweeter. So bad wine usually got a little more, although most of Nuremberg was consuming the beer because the water was so polluted. A law was passed in the 16th century banning any land to add mercury to the wine. Common symptoms of mercury poisoning include peripheral neuropathy, skin discoloration, swelling, desquamation, profuse sweating, tachycardia, increased salivation, and hypertension, high blood pressure. Affected children may show red cheeks, nose and lips, loss of hair, teeth, and nails, transient rashes, hypotonia, and increased sensitivity to light. Other symptoms may include kidney dysfunction or neuropsychiatric symptoms such as emotional lability, memory impairment, and/or insomnia. Lead poisoning. Symptoms may be different in adults and children. The main symptoms in adults are headache, abdominal pain, memory loss, kidney failure, male reproductive problems and weaknesses, pain or tingling in the extremities. Early symptoms of lead poisoning in adults are commonly nonspecific and include depression, loss of appetite, intermittent abdominal pain, nausea, diarrhea, constipation, and muscle pain. Other early signs in adults include malaise, fatigue, decreased libido, and problems with sleep. An unusual taste in the mouth and personality changes are also early signs. All of these above said pigments are created, applied, and continue to be deadly toxins until they are sealed within a clear coat of lacquer to seal in these toxins. If they are left unsealed or begin to flake or turn into a dust, it becomes a deadly painting of toxins. Deteriorating lead can produce dangerous lead levels in a household dust and soil. Deteriorating lead and lead-containing household dust are the main causes of chronic lead poisoning. Were any paintings unsealed or overpainted and unsealed? The answer is yes. Even if a Durer sealed a painting, all they would have to do is overpaint on the sealed coat to poison clients, just even a little bit. Or if any paintings were covered with new pigments to conceal any trace of the cipher by others who realized there were clues or were doing restoration, the new paint would be sitting on the surface in brilliant fashion, poisoning by the day. German curators have already proved that there are many areas of overpainting in the Durer paintings. Who the Durers hated, as shown by color. You are now going to see who the Durers hated, as obviously shown by the colors he selected, starting from the end of his life. You will see many paintings here that were poisonous, and many more to still come later in the article. The Four Apostles. Durer did not paint these four paintings on commission. It was he who wanted to donate them to Nuremberg, his native city. 1826, the artist offered the four holy men to the city fathers of Nuremberg. Quote, I have been intending, for a long time past, to show my respect for your excellencies by the presentation of some humble picture of mine as a remembrance, but I have been prevented from doing so by the imperfection and insignificance of my works. Now, however, that I have just painted a panel upon which I have bestowed more trouble than on any other painting, I considered none more worthy to keep it as a memorial than your excellencies. End quote. As it was common in many cities in Italy to bestow the town hall with a work of art that would serve as an example of buon governo, so did Durer want to provide his native city with a work of his that had been purposefully made to this end. The council gratefully accepted the gift, hanging the two works in the upper government chamber of the city hall. Durer was awarded an honorarium of 100 florins. The four monumental figures remained in the municipality of Nuremberg until 1627, when, following threats of repression, they had to be sold to the Elector of Bavaria, Maximilian I, a great enthusiast of Durer's work. On that occasion, however, the prince had the inscriptions at the bottom of the painting sawed off and sent back to Nuremberg, as they were considered heretical and injurious to his position as the sovereign Catholic. The city handed them over to the museum in Munich in 1922, where they were rejoined with their respective panels. Notice that these paintings are almost all lead white, vermilions, green, orpiment, and black. Albrecht really wanted to take advantage of the whole government, the city council, where every day they would be inhaling the noxious fumes. He even donated them and got paid for his work. Way to Calvary, painted in 1527. Made for Emperor Charles V in 1527, the boy king whom Albrecht had to beg for his pension back. I don't think you can find a blacker black painting with white lead poison than this. It speaks for itself. The black pigments were deadly. Portrait of Hieronymus Holzschuher, one of the top Nuremberg patricians. Notice the lead white, the black, and the orpiment. Jacob Fugger, the wealthy. The presence of this portrait is documented in the 18th century in the gallery of the Elector of Bavaria. Because of successive restorations, the top layer of color is missing. During the Diet of Augsburg in 1518, Durer portrayed Jacob Fugger in a charcoal drawing. The final painting on canvas differs from the drawing in the wealthier clothing of the subject, and, above all, in the framing. A half bust in the drawing, a half length in the painting. Everybody hated the Fuggers in Nuremberg. Notice the blues, the lead white, the black. The Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian. Look at how the green background is, with reds, orpiments, white lead and black. Albrecht really hated his patron. Two prints tell us of his biggest humiliations, and the emperor didn't even pay Albrecht for 1 year. Portrait of Bernhard von Riesen. The man in the portrait holds a message on which the first few letters of his name can be read, the rest being hidden by the fingers of his left hand. This is almost certainly the painting to which Durer refers to in his Antwerp diary in late March 1521, recording that he had said, "Made a portrait of Bernhard von Riesen in oils, for which he had been paid 8 florins. Durer's reference is probably to Bernhard von Riesen, 1491 to 1521, a Danzig merchant whose family had important business links with Antwerp. His name suggests that his family originated from Ries, a town on the lower Rhine, 100 miles east of Antwerp. Look at how much red, black, and white lead is in this painting. The 1521 Saint Jerome. Durer painted Saint Jerome in Antwerp in March 1521 and presented the panel to his friend Rodrigo Ferdinand de Almada. He wrote in his diary, "I painted a Jerome carefully in oils and gave it to Rodrigo of Portugal." The panel was displayed in the merchant's private chapel in Antwerp and was later taken back to Portugal. It is the only religious picture that Durer painted in the Netherlands. The figure of the saint is based on a drawing of an old bearded man. On the drawing, Durer inscribed, "The man was 93 years old, and yet healthy and strong in Antwerp." This is an extremely encoded painting, with many nasty messages. Look at the green, the red, and the orpiment. The apostles Paul and Philip. Could we get any more white lead than in these paintings? Or the black and the red, even the white lead lettering. Michael Volgemuth. After he had achieved great fame, Durer depicted the master who had taught him to paint. On it he inscribed, "This portrait was done by Albrecht Durer of his teacher, Michael Volgemuth, in 1516, to which he later added, and he was 82 years old, and he lived until 1519, when he departed this life on St. Andrew's Day morning before sunrise." It is unclear from the inscription whether Volgemuth was 82 when he died, or when the portrait had been painted 3 years earlier. The fact that curators clearly say that Albrecht overpainted this painting with an additional inscription would have been enough to activate all the poisons. Look at how green the deadly background is, all the black, the inscription in orpiment. Portrait of man with beret and scroll. There is an inscription near his head, monogrammed and dated 152 ? The last digit of the date is not clearly legible, so 1 or a 4, but the fact that the panel is in oak indicates that the painting must have been carried out during Durer's trip to the Netherlands. The hypotheses regarding the name of the subject are various. The most frequent are the one of Lorenz Sterk, an administrator and financial curator of the Brabant and of Antwerp, who was involved in getting Albrecht's pension back, and that of Jops Plankveld, Durer's innkeeper in Antwerp. These names are frequently suggested since Durer writes in his diary that he had done oil portraits of them. It is difficult to imagine an innkeeper who made himself depicted with a scroll in hand, whereas it seems much more plausible that the imposing subject characterized by a severe and scrutinizing gaze, clad in a silk shirt, a cloak with a fur collar, and a large beret, corresponds to a tax collector. Lucretia. This panel is mentioned in the inventory dated 1598 of the Kunstkammer of Munich. The cloth around the hips was presumably expanded upward around 1600. The opinion that the Lucretia, all things considered, was Durer's most unpopular work is undoubtedly widely shared. That's because it's an encoded painting. Just look at all of the lead white, the red, the greenish gray. The 1507 Adam and Eva painting. We don't know for whom these paintings were commissioned, but we do know they were acquired by the Bishop of Breslau, Johann v. Thurzo, a distant relation to the Fugger family, and then ended up in the collection of the Emperor Rudolf II in Prague. It's clearly obvious by the use of poisonous colors. It wasn't someone the Durers liked. Look at Eva's flesh. It's described as whiter than white. Then Adam's skin, white lead everywhere, with the poisonous green right at the genitals, with the killer black paint in extraordinary amounts. Let us not forget, when one gets close to the painting to read the inscription left by Albrecht, they are greeted with white lead, very close to the face. The Haller altarpiece. The Haller altar was an oil-on-panel triptych by German Renaissance artists Durer and Matthias Grunwald, executed between 1507 and 1509. In 1615, Durer copyist Jacob Herrick painted a duplicate, which is now at the Städel Museum in Frankfurt. In 1615, the central panel, the only one by Durer alone, was sold to Maximilian of Bavaria. A copy was ordered to replace the original in its location at the church's high altar. The central panel was destroyed by a fire in Munich in 1729. The side panels, executed by Durer's assistants, were completed by 4 others commissioned to Matthias Grunwald in 1510. The side shutters were detached in the 18th century, and each of the 2 panels composing them were separated in 1804. This altarpiece was commissioned by Jacob Haller, 1460 to 1522, a wealthy merchant, member of the town council and mayor of Frankfurt, either before or after Durer's second trip to Italy. Only the central element depicting the Assumption and coronation of the Virgin was executed by Durer himself. The altarpiece was destroyed by a fire in the residence of Duke Maximilian of Bavaria in Munich. Fortunately, a copy of the work executed around 1614 by Jacob Herrick of Nuremberg, circa 1580 to 1617, had survived. Albrecht was receiving many commissions after having won the paint-off with the Italians in Venice in 1506, especially from this old patron, the Elector, Duke Frederick of Saxony. Albrecht wrote to Haller. Of course, the originals were lost, but there were copies paid for by the Archduke Maximilian of Bavaria, who acquired the paintings and wanted the provenance and documentation, as well as those German scribe copyists were very busy. He thus tells us, he was sick from returning from Venice, all that partying, and he had to finish the Elector's altarpiece first, the Martyrdom of the 10,000, and then he would start on the Haller's altarpiece. The outcome of the whole situation was that Haller misunderstood all of Albrecht's intentions, almost sued him for breach of contract, trashed Albrecht Durer's reputation to everyone in town, and pissed off Albrecht beyond comprehension. In his last letter to Haller, Albrecht makes the following remarks, quote, "I have painted it with great care, as you will see, using none but the best colors. It is painted with good ultramarine under and over about 5 or 6 times. And then, after it was finished, I overpainted it twice more, so that it may last a long time, for it is not made as one usually paints. So don't let it be touched or sprinkled with holy water, and place the painting so it hangs forward 2 or 3 finger breadths, so it can be seen without glare. And when I come to you in a year or 2 or 3, if the picture is properly dry, it must be taken down, and I will varnish it again with some excellent varnish that no one else can make." End quote. Do we see enough blues and reds and greens and orpiment and lead white to kill a horse, especially if the painting wouldn't be dry for possibly 3 years? The Martyrdom of the 10,000 for the Elector, Duke Frederick of Saxony. The altarpiece depicts the legend of the 10,000 Christians who were martyred on Mount Ararat in a massacre perpetrated by the Persian king Saparat on the command of Roman emperors Hadrian and Antonius. Durer had depicted this massacre a decade earlier in a woodcut. The painting was commissioned by Frederick the Wise, who owned relics from the massacre, and it was placed in the relic chamber of his palace church in Wittenberg. Although Durer had never tackled a painting with so many figures, he succeeded in integrating them in a flowing composition using vibrant color. Durer's gruesome scene depicts scores of Christians meeting a violent death in a rocky landscape, providing a veritable compendium of tortures and killings. The Oriental potentate in the blue coat and turban, who is directing the action in the lower right corner of the picture, would in Durer's time have been perceived as a reference to the threat of the Turkish invasion because of the seizure of Constantinople in 1453. In the center of the painting is a rather incongruous figure of the artist, holding a staff with the inscription, "This work was done in the year 1508 by Albrecht Durer, German." The man walking with him through the scene of carnage is probably the scholar Conrad Keltis, a friend of Durer's who had died just before the painting was completed. I think you can see enough poisonous paints in this painting to realize that Durer's also hated the Duke. Portrait of a young man. Blacks, lead white, and reds. This striking portrait, painted in Venice, shows a thoughtful young man, richly dressed and dramatically set against a black background. His thick ginger hair, partly hidden with his dark hat, frames his face. The small part of his red shirt showing adds a dramatic touch of color. Charles I acquired this work for the royal collection. Portrait of Burkhard von Speyer. The sitter was identified as Burkhard von Speyer after it was realized that he looks just like the man in a miniature in Weimar by an unknown artist, also dated 1506 and inscribed with his name. Nothing more is known about him, although presumably he originally came from Speyer, a town on the Rhine near Heidelberg. Burkhard von Speyer also appears in the altarpiece of the Rose Garlands, wearing the same clothing. He is on the left side of the picture, just to the right of the first kneeling cardinal. You can't get a blacker portrait, with the reds and the lead white, than the one Albrecht made for Charles V. The Feast of the Rose Garlands. This is the painting that won the paint-off between the Venetian Italians and Durer in 1506. This panel was painted for an altar for the German community in Venice, in the Church of St. Bartholomew, where it remained until 1606. It was then acquired after many negotiations for 900 ducats by Emperor Rudolph II. According to Sandrit, 4 men were hired to bring the packaged painting to the Emperor's residence in Prague. Stationed elsewhere during the invasion of the Swedish troops, the painting, already very damaged, returned to its place in 1635. It underwent a first restoration in 1662. In 1782, it was sold at an auction for 1 florin. After having passed through the hands of various collectors, it was acquired by the Czechoslovakian state in 1930. The painting, severely damaged chiefly in the center portion, from the head of the Madonna and continually downward to the bottom, was clumsily restored in the 19th century. In this restoration, the upper side portion, left of the canopy and to St. Dominic's head, was also included. 3 copies of the work are known. One, considered the most important and which now belongs to a private collection, is attributed to Hans Rottenhammer, who sojourned in Venice from 1596 to 1606, where he took care of many acquisitions on behalf of Rudolph II. Another is in Vienna, and the third, a rather modified version of the original, is in Lyon. Have a close look at this painting. There's enough toxic paint to kill all the Italians and Germans too. Portrait of a young Venetian woman. The portrait is one of the first works of the artist during his second sojourn in Venice. It was painted in the autumn or in the winter of 1506, with reference to some of the details. It has been repeatedly made known that the portrait is unfinished. Look at the reds, the lead white and the black, added for extra danger, suspiciously left unfinished. The Adoration of the Magi. The Elector, Frederick the Wise of Saxony, ordered this painting for the church castle in Wittenberg. It was once believed to be the central part of a polyptych, with, on the side wings, the story of Job, in Frankfurt and Cologne. However, this hypothesis has already been called into question. The Elector of Saxony then donated the painting to Emperor Rudolf II in 1603, in exchange with the presentation at the temple by Fra Bartolomeo, brought in 1793 from the gallery in Venice to the Uffizi. Durer framed and delimited a large space by an architecture composed of arches in a very refined perspective. The three kings arrived at this slightly elevated space from the back after having climbed 2 steps. A single figure, sharply foreshortened, followed in their footsteps and in the distant background. Only the upper half of his body is shown where he now stands at the bottom of the 2 steps. He is oriental and wearing a turban. The heavy traveling bag he holds probably contains precious gifts for the infant Jesus. The Madonna is clad in azure clothes and cape, a white veil covering her head. She is holding out the infant, who is wrapped in her white veil, to the eldest king, who wears deadly green clothing. He is offering the infant a gold casket with the image of St. George, which the infant has already taken with his right hand. This is the only action that unfolds in the principal scene, except for the Oriental servant's gesture of putting his hand in his bag. All the other characters are motionless, immersed in thought. They look straight ahead or sideways, creating the effect of a stage spectacle set with immobile characters. Every color in this painting is horrendously toxic, and right in the viewer's face and nostrils. The Baumgartner Altar. This triptych was commissioned by the brothers Stephen and Lucas Baumgartner for St. Catherine's Church in Nuremberg. The main panel depicts the Nativity, set in an architectural ruin. The left wing shows St. George with a fearsome dragon, and the right wing with St. Eustace, with both saints dressed as knights and holding identifying banners. A 17th century manuscript records that the side panels were painted in 1498 and that the 2 saints were given the features of the Baumgartner brothers, with Stephen on the left and Lucas on the right. This is the earliest occasion on which an artist is known to have used the facial features of a donor in depicting a saint. But of course, Stephen was Albrecht's lover. The small figures at the bottom corners of the central panel are the Baumgartner family with their coats of arms, painted over in the 17th century, when donor portraits went out of favor, and were only uncovered during restoration in 1903. On the left behind Joseph are the male members of the family. Martin Baumgartner, followed by his 2 sons, Lucas and Stephen, and an elderly bearded figure who may be Hans Schonbach, second husband of Barbara Baumgartner. On the far right is Barbara Baumgartner, with her daughters, Maria and Barbara. Every color in this altarpiece is toxic, and especially with the restoration could still be. The Virgin of the 7 Sorrows. This panel is a large picture depicting Mary as the Mother of Sorrows. It was severely damaged in an attack when acid was thrown at it in 1988 and 10 years had been spent restoring it. It is the central picture of 7 scenes from the Passion, which are now in Dresden. The work was presumably ordered by the Elector Frederick the Wise. Look at the black and the white lead, the ornament in the blue, which doesn't even show well in this picture, but I have just returned from seeing it at the Städel. A deadly toxic painting for all to look at, worship, and inhale. And this brings us to the end of the examples of the deadly toxic paintings the Durers made for their patrons. Thank goodness these are all in museums where only the staff are still being exposed to such dangers. And stay tuned, because we will be discussing the family portrait paintings.